Okay, let's start from your humble beginnings. You was born in Juarez, Mexico. How old were you when you moved to the States?
I was about 3 years old when I first moved to Texas. 3 to 4 years old.
Okay, so you pretty much was raised in East Dallas. How was your life growing up as a kid in East Dallas, and what type of stuff were you seeing in that environment?
I mean, East Dallas at the time, this was during the 80s and 90s, there was a big immigrant community. At that time, there was a lot of gangs, a lot of violence. There was a lot of gangs like Eastside Locos, Wayne Street, El Barrio, and my brother was heavily involved in those gangs as well. So it was a rough upbringing as a kid.
Okay, can you describe the environment of East Dallas at the time for the viewers that never been there?
Well, East Dallas, where I lived, I used to live on Martinique off of Santa Fe. Then we eventually moved over to Fairview, but we were always on the other side of the tracks, away from Columbia. So that part of East Dallas, which is now people call it Old East Dallas, it was the most dangerous part of East Dallas you could live in during the time. This was also during the time that the crack pandemic had hit the U.S. in every major urban city. So that just really accounted for why there were so many issues with East Dallas at the time.
Okay, when did you start noticing graffiti, and who were some of the names you first noticed around this time?
I mean, I first noticed graffiti just from, watching Beat Street. This was like learning as a kid, watching Beat Street and seeing Ramo talking about Phase 2 and learning from documentaries like Subway Art, Star Wars, different things like that, and the movie Wild Style. So all those things were big influences on myself, because being in Texas, you really don't have a lot of reference to where graffiti came from. But Texas, at that time, I would say very early writers were Shoals, Mosquito, Ozone, and Ross 13. There was a brother from L.A. by the name of Chino who came through, and I'd say Chino was the biggest influence in terms of technique, because he brought some things from L.A. that I had never seen before. Like what we would call back then an LA cap. Some people call it a stencil cap. Chino was one of the first people I've seen use those, and that really helped people like myself and other writers that wanted to create things that were more detailed, and just learn techniques from people like that.
Okay, so would you say those are the people that inspired you to write?
I would say Ozone and Mosquito were my first really big influences in terms of not knowing who they were, but seeing a lot of their graffiti, around Exposition Park, Spray Can Alley, and then seeing some of Ozone's really early characters just randomly around East Dallas. He would paint some spots that I'm pretty sure were illegal, but he would mostly do characters at the time. Ross 13 was a big influence. He was one of the first black writers that I got to work with and paint with very early on. And you don't see a lot of writers that are black and brown that do graffiti in Dallas, especially during that time.
Okay. Okay, you started out writing in 93 and 94. Who were some of your inspirations on style and bombing at that time?
We really didn't have a lot of inspiration for style and bombing at that time. We just did what we could. We painted what we painted. We just came up with our own style because we didn't have a lot to be influenced by at that time. We didn't really know about caps. We ended up learning later, about New York Fats. But at the time when we first started, we were just all pretty much using stock caps and whatever paint we could find. And at that time, I was writing with a graffiti writer who at the time was going by a different name. A lot of people know him as Det. And we've been writing and bombing and painting freights for a long time.
Okay, you started dabbling around with names like Create and Menace. What made you come up with those and eventually drop those names?
Well, when I first started graffiti, I was just a teenager in high school, and I think when you're that young, you're still trying to figure out who you are as a person and what you want to say as an individual. Those names were just names that I was still learning, still trying to experiment, and once I started to actually get better at writing and actually think about what I wanted to write, that's when Marka came about. I wanted everybody to know that Marka was a Mexican writer, a Latino writer, somebody who comes with that culture, so I wanted my name to be in Spanish. And Marka for me means literally to write, to leave an impression on somebody.
Okay. So your first crew you was in was called SAC, or Sick Ass Click. How did you meet roster team Kung Fu, Vert, and Jedi?
That was a long time ago. Wow. Sick Ass Click. Wow, dude, you're talking like, man, freight days. We all met through freights. We all painted freights heavily. We did, also go bombing and painting and just painting wherever we felt like at the time. We were extremely rebellious and in and out of trouble, in and out of jail, breaking into buildings. At that time there was a lot of illegal raves happening, and we would find out where they were going to happen. We'd break into the warehouse where they were going to throw these parties, and we would paint those walls even before the party started. So when people would show up by the hundreds, you would basically show up and see your pieces on the wall. We were, I don't know, man, at that time maybe 17, 18, probably younger, and it was Vert, Jedi, who else was it? Kung Fu, who later changed his name to Chosen, and we just were young, and we were all from East Dallas, and we pretty much wanted to watch each other's back while we painted. That's how that came about.
Okay. At this point, you would meet up with the High Crew, THC, which was Abyss, Tex, and Minus. After seeing some of their characters and bums from the old Major Theater, which is an old theater in East Dallas, how did you get introduced to them, and what was your initial thoughts of them and their work?
Tex and Abyss and the Pleasant Grove guys at the time, I want to say the first time I saw their work was at a spot that we were already painting, not at Major Theater, but another spot that was kind of close to downtown. It was kind of what people would call the second Pearl Stone Alamo Bridge. We were painting freights there and decided to paint on the silos there, and that's when we had seen some of very early Tex characters and Abyss characters painted around there. I think it was Jedi who first introduced us to some of the Pleasant Grove guys, because Major Theater was doing some hip-hop shows at the time, and we ended up meeting them because of that, because of Major Theater. But we saw their work even before that, and we were painting in similar spots.
Okay, y'all would eventually form I.C.E. What does I.C.E. stand for?
I.C.E stands for Infinity Crew.
Okay, who were the original members of that crew?
The original members were Kung Fu, myself, Jedi, Vert, Ozone, roster team, and I want to say that was the very origins of it. Then came Abyss and Tex and the Pleasant Grove brothers, who wanted to make the crew bigger.
Okay. Do you know who came up with the crew? Because I heard a few people said it was Ross 13 that came up with the crew. Now, in recent interviews, I heard it was a guy named Mashout, so maybe you can shine a light on it.
Mashout was a brother that was more of an MC, and he was from Minneapolis. He wasn't from Dallas. He just had family in Texas. And I want to say Mashout was there for conversations, but Ross 13 was the one who came up with the name Infinity Crew. And also, man, at that time, there was just a lot of discussions about Infinity Crew, what it could be, who we're painting with. and it also was more about just trying to create an atmosphere, you know, trying to create something that we could all collaborate on. We wanted to do more than just bombing. We actually wanted to get into creating productions and, you know, walls that had a theme. You know, I think everybody was just trying to find their skill set and create something that was more special.
Okay, fair enough. Soon after I.C.E proclaimed to be the coldest crew in D-Town, who did y'all battle to get that name at the time?
I don't even think that it was even about battling anybody. I think the coldest crew in D-Town was just something that Chino and Ross were playing with because they did a theme off of the I.C.E bear and the I.C.E slushies. And I think the coldest crew in D-Town was just referring to an ice cold I.C.E drink. I think people probably took that way too literal. And at that time, I wasn't really too focused on I.C.E.
Okay, y'all would start painting the Ace parking lot in Deep Ellum. What was your memories of Ace and what was your favorite piece that you did at Ace?
I don't really have a favorite piece of mine.
It's not censored.
It is, but you gotta actually walk around for it. No, you gotta walk this way. There you go. You got it. No, my favorite piece at Ace Parking Lot was something that Chino and Ross painted. They did these samurai letter styles with like a really dope Asian background that kind of looked like a Zen landscape painting, and their pieces had blades and armor as if their letters were hooked up with samurai gear. It was probably one of my favorites.
Okay, I'm assuming you was in high school at this time, so what school did you go to, and were there any writers that you can remember that came under you that went to that school?
I really can't speak to who else went to that school, but I went to Booker T. Washington. That was the high school that I went to.
Okay, can you describe Pearl Stone for someone who's never been there, and what was it like painting there?
I mean, Pearl Stone was discovered by Ross 13. He was the first person that brought us to Pearl Stone, and I think Ross was cool with some of the like punk kids that were squatting there, because there was a couple of homeless punk squatters that would go to Pearl Stone. These are the same kids that would hop freight trains and go from city to city, and there was other homeless communities that were there, all really friendly, good people that just needed a place to stay, going through hard times. And we would go there and just, you know, paint inside of Pearl Stone. And Ross 13 had the first piece I had ever seen at Pearl Stone that was like an amazing piece, full-on burner, using every color you could think of, and a character with dreadlocks. So I thought Ross 13 at that time was surpassing Ozone and Mosquito and everybody I had met before, because he was painting these complex pieces illegally, not just in Pearl Stone, but, you know, also Alamo Bridge and other spots that I hadn't seen anybody paint like that before.
Okay, I seen an interview that Minus said that you was one of the first guy he started painting with on a regular basis as far as Pearl Stone goes. What was it like painting with Minus, and what was your favorite piece painting with him?
Minus was always a good dude. I liked Minus a lot because he had Chicago roots, and he had a different style from everybody else. I know he was very tight with his family back in Chi-Town, and I think his letters and his style and just his mentality was a bit different from everyone else in I.C.E. I think that Minus and I had some great times painting at Pearl Stone, just the two of us. And I don't know, I don't really have a favorite. I had a good time anytime I painted with him.
Okay, so every piece was your favorite piece, pretty much.
You know, for me, I don't really care about what the piece looked like, right? I've always, what I remember more than the piece is the moment that I shared with these brothers. So, you know, there's moments where you're painting with somebody, you're getting chased, you barely get away, or you get locked up together. I remember that more than the piece, to be honest. And those memories, like just talking to Minus about, you know, basic shit, life shit, working together on walls, or just painting together, having that camaraderie for me was more memorable than what we actually painted.
Okay. All right. So nothing is forever. Around '98, you, Chosen, and Ozone will leave I.C.E. What was the reason y'all decided to leave the crew?
I left I.C.E in '97. I don't know about when everybody else left I.C.E. I left I.C.E mostly because I wanted to go in a different direction. I also didn't think that at that time everybody was on the same page, or everyone wanted to take the crew to a level that was more focused. I feel like maybe Ozone and myself, maybe even Vert, were just wanting to focus on creating more complex murals. And when you do that, if everybody's not on the same page, then you don't want to be the background person or the character person or the person that's trying to figure out how to tie it all together or coming up with themes or concepts, or even logistically, how are we going to get the paint? Like, it just becomes a lot for just a few people to carry that weight. So unless you're a crew where everybody's really contributing the same level of intensity and also wanting to really collaborate, you know, aesthetically, visually, it really didn't feel like something I wanted to continue doing. So I decided to just leave I.C.E in '97.
Okay. At this point, you would do more bombing and hidden freights more. What made you start painting more freights?
I mean, it's Texas. You're gonna paint freights. That's like the best thing to paint in Texas.
Okay, you started painting with Det a lot. How did y'all meet?
Det and I met through graffiti. We were both tagging at the time. He saw me getting up, I saw him getting up, and we just kind of ran into each other on the street. And then, you know, have been pretty much, you know, ride or die since then.
Okay, around '98 or '99, y'all would create UD. What does UD stand for, and how did y'all come up with the crew?
That's Det's crew, you know, and I'm just one of the people that, you know, basically rocked with him since its inception, and you know, he called it Underdogs, and he did that because Dallas as a whole is a huge underdog city when you think about graffiti, hip hop culture. It's not known for those things as much as bigger cities like Los Angeles and New York. Obviously, because they're the ones that influence Dallas. You can't say that Dallas has its own style, because it does not. Every style that Dallas has ever created has always been influenced from another place. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that people from Dallas have evolved and have done some cool things. But Underdog was basically us saying that, you know, despite us being a city or being writers from somewhere that's not looked at as a major influence, we were still gonna do our best and, you know, create our own style.
Okay. Who were some of the members from that crew?
UD?
Yes.
You'd have to ask that question.
Okay.
You're asking a man that, you know, hasn't been painting actively, and can't speak on that.
Okay. After bombing and painting freights with Det, you would land in Lulu, which is Lou Stereo for people that's not from Dallas. And shortly, you will receive a scholarship to the Museum School of Fine Arts in Boston. How did it feel coming out of jail for art to get a scholarship for art?
I mean, it felt like there was a really racist judge that gave zero fucks about me, because he knew I had a scholarship and he knew I was about to go to college in Boston, but this judge literally put me on probation on my first year in college. So I always said to myself, if I was a white kid standing in front of a white judge, and I had a full scholarship to a prestigious art school, it would have been no question. You know, I think he would have gave me community service and a slap on the wrist, but because I was Mexican and was from East Dallas, I'm pretty sure this judge wanted to make sure that I would land back in jail. That's just the way the system works. And because he put me on probation, I'm pretty sure he was hoping I would ruin that somehow and end up back in jail. It's a terrible system. I'm completely against mass incarceration and the carceral system. I've seen it ruin a lot of lives.
Okay, you would leave for Boston and you would link up with 3A crew in A.L.A, African Latino Alliance. What was it like painting with those guys, and what was your favorite wall you did with that crew, those crews?
3A was the homies Kem and GES. You know, shout out to Kem and GES. They've been longtime friends, and they're still extremely active as far as graffiti goes. You know, we painted a couple of walls together. Again, I don't have any favorites. I just think more about the relationships that I establish with people and the moments that we share. I think that's something that's more important to me than what we actually painted. With A.L.A crew, it's a bit different. And I say this respectfully, 3A, we always painted things that was strictly for graffiti culture, strictly for graffiti writers. It was more about the letters, it was more about the colors and the style. But A.L.A, really, it was about the people. We did murals that had a lot of deep substance. You know, we did a mural that was called Strange Fruit. That mural was about the song that Billie Holiday wrote. This was a graffiti production, and it was about lynchings in the South. We also did another production, Pro-Black, Ozone, Quest, myself, Dean 5, and that mural was called From the Pyramids to the Projects, and it was really a mural that was based on a book by journalist, writer, African-American writer, I.C.E called From the Pyramids to the Projects. And Zone, at the time, who was the person who started A.L.A, we were heavily influenced by a painting that he did based on that book. And it, you know, shows a pharaoh head in the center. To the left, it shows graffiti writers painting on walls. To the right, it shows graffiti writers painting on walls. And it shows turntables, it shows, you know, the projects. And then on the opposite side, it shows Egyptians doing hieroglyphics. It shows conga drums from Africa. So there's a split narrative about From the Pyramids to the Projects. I also, you know, ended up painting a lot with FLY ID crew in the Bronx and in Brooklyn and New York. And FLY ID came out to Boston and painted a couple of really memorable productions with us.
Okay, that was actually my next question. So we're gonna skip that one. So you started transitioning into murals and toys. What made you start with the Mini God speakers?
I mean, I went to school and just learned about product design, learned about graphic design, was in the footwear industry for a while. When I was in L.A, I worked for a toy company as well. And touring and, you know, also visiting different countries. The first time I went to Asia, I had noticed this amazing artist by the name of Michael Lau. Michael Lau was the godfather of urban vinyl. You know, he was creating these really dope figures that were just based on hip-hop culture, street culture, graffiti culture. It was just really, you know, interesting figures that were also toys. And also Futura, you know, Medicom, all these big brands that were working with graffiti artists inspired me to make my own toys. And that's where the Mini Gods were born.
Okay, we're almost done. You recently had your art on display at the Latin Cultural Center in Dallas. How did that come about, and was that a full circle moment for you coming back to the city that raised you?
I would say that the full circle moment is still in the works. I also had a huge exhibition that was planned at the University of North Texas that was abruptly taken down That exhibition is called Ni de aquí ni de allá. That exhibition really represents the duality of being from two places. It represents what it means to be from one country growing up in the U.S. It speaks to the diversity of our culture, the beauty of our culture, the heritage of our culture, and everything that we bring to this country to make it as incredible as it is. Unfortunately, that exhibition was censored by UNT and taken down. And to this day, we are working on bringing that exhibition to another space in Dallas. The good news was that the Latino Cultural Center, we always planned accordingly to have this 200 cooler pyramid that's 20 feet tall at the Latino Cultural Center. That first was shown in New York City at the Shed at Hudson Yards. From New York, it went to Boston, Rose Kennedy Greenway, and from Boston, it went to Miami for Art Basel during Scope Art Fair. It was the featured installation at Scope Art Week. And from there, we connected with the Latino Cultural Center. They were incredibly excited to host the pyramid and have it in Dallas, especially because of my roots in Dallas. And it was an incredible moment to have it there. When we did our reception on February 17th, we had over 400 people attend, had a great audience, had lots of students from UNT, had a lot of people come out from East Dallas, old friends, new friends, supporters of all kinds. And bringing that installation to Dallas was a special moment because I grew up with street vendors, and a cooler for me, it represents that struggle. It represents that resilience. When you first come to this country, I don't care if you're in Chicago or East Dallas or L.A. or the Bronx, you're gonna see street vendors from all over the world, from the Caribbean, from the African diaspora, from the Latin Central America. You're gonna see people with their coolers selling water, selling mangoes, selling nutcrackers, selling whatever they can to just make a living. And I wanted to create a monument that honors that struggle.
Okay. So we touched on that. A follow-up question was, has anybody given you a reason or have anyone reached out to apologize for taking it down?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. The last thing we talked about, or we're going to talk about, is I have a game that we play. It's called 7 Deadly Sins, where you choose, like if you was in a crew and you had to go to war with another crew as far as a battle, who would your 7 best artists that you would want to take dead or alive to battle someone?
I'm honestly the worst person to ask that question. 'Cause I've never really cared about battling. I think that graffiti style, it's all subjective, man. Like there's some styles that some people may not like because they're too complex. There's some styles that people may not like because it's 3D and they don't, people don't respect 3D. So it's difficult to even say, like, it's not like sports, right? Sports, there's a definitive winner and loser, right? But visual arts or graffiti, unless there's a way to measure, it's kind of difficult to battle somebody, because at the end of the day, it becomes extremely subjective, and it becomes somebody's taste and their point of view and what they like and what they don't like. If you're battling bombing, that's different. When Jay went head to head with Saber, or Chaco was taking over L.A., that you can measure. That you can literally count and see how many spots this brother hit. But who's to say you have FX battle Tats Crew, battle TC5? Like, it all comes down to people's preference and what they like, man. So I'm the worst person when it comes to battling, because I like what I like, and I don't really necessarily see a battle being something that you can choose who the definite winner is.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, we covered a lot of things today. Is there anything you want to cover that you feel that we missed?
I mean, I'd say my time in Los Angeles was a huge influence. Being around Chas Bojorquez, painting with COI crew, with Man One, with Sacred, you know, linking up with brothers like Coffee during that time, meeting Persuade and connecting with him. Like, the West Coast has a special place in my heart. I was there only for 4 years, and my wife was born and raised there. But, you know, painting at the Belmont tunnels and, you know, rocking with Vile out there and really just being immersed in that culture had a big influence on my art now, all these years later, you know. So I'd say, you know, shout out to A.L.A, shout out to OG Slick, all the brothers that are out there that are still killing it. Chasbo Jorquez, who's a major influence for many of us, you know, Chicano, Mexican artists. You know, that dude's the GOAT.
Okay. Any last words or shout-outs?
Yeah. I want to say that, you know, the exhibition is still going to happen in Dallas, and I'm looking forward to letting people know soon where the new location is going to be.
Okay. Thanks for the interview. Marka27. Peace.